Yo, how you doing? So chapter 16 by Nick. I'm just going to jump into it. I have to admit something at this point in the book. Generally, I've liked the kind of style and flow of the Matt chapters more than Nick's chapters until being the elite is a great chapter. So at the end of the last chapter, they left AJ Styles and Gallows and Anderson for dead, and went extra on AJ in order to keep their heat, Kenny Omega and the Bucks in New Japan, and to make sure that they were at the forefront of the Bullet Club. So they kind of have their own, you know, curtain call moment where Matt guesses correctly that AJ is going to the WWE and he's going to be in the Royal Rumble. And they cry, and it shows like these bonds are very real. And I think some people think like because wrestling tends to be such a cutthroat business, but at the same time, all of these guys understand each other. It's a band of brothers thing, and it's very real. And in Nick's life, gets a healthy baby boy, Gregory, 9 pounds. That's how big I was. Pretty cool. So everything seems like it's going great. Like the birth happens, it's no problems, none of that kind of stuff. So Nick is always very honest about stuff, and I love it. And he sort of describes how he feels like the rest of the Bullet Club were sort of separating themselves from them a little bit. Like there's a little animosity, probably because they were kind of taking over things a little bit. And so they start doing this elite thing, and they make their own the elite thing. And they're saying how like their Bullet Club shirt checks were always like a couple hundred every quarter. So you're talking like 800 a year. Considering how many of those shirts sold, I mean, he felt like they were getting kind of screwed on it. So they did their own shirts called the Elite, and they wore it themselves, and it started to outsell the Bullet Club shirts. Can you imagine? To the point where New Japan was like, "Oh, we're gonna buy. Can we buy the rights to that logo for a couple $100 and 2.5% of the royalty?" And they said no. So then Kenny wins the IWGP, which is the fucking one of the big titles, right? And so then they put together this video where Kenny Omega, because he cheats to win because the Bucks help him, does a press conference in Japan, and he's right in describing this. Press conferences are treated really seriously. So Kenny Omega does the apology, sorry for, but then they splice in them in a karaoke room singing Raise Your Glass by Pink, but it's Raise Your Belt, and then like him raising the title, and they splice that in with his apology video. And of course it's a huge hit. And that's sort of the real birth of being the elite. They do this thing where they challenge the New Day from WWE, trying to get them to interact, which of course they don't really do because they're under the WWE. But then they wear New Day shirts out in Japan, and so they're really coming up with some great stuff. And I love this discussion of like coming up with a name for it. They're like on the road with the elite or hitting the street with the elite. I got it, I said, being the elite. It's short and sweet and describes exactly what the video will be about. Us. Matt agreed right away. And they talk about this process of getting the subscriber count up, which is everything on YouTube, and how it didn't really work at first. But then Colt Cabana, who had this ultra successful podcast, for years and years and years. If you guys are serious about making weekly content, you have to stick to it. Do it every single week. The most important thing is producing good content consistently. And he talks about how like 8 years earlier they tried it, Young Buck TV, but it didn't really work. But now it's working, right? In the town of Chicago Ridge, at one of these joint shows of Ring of Honor in New Japan, Matt and I helped write, produce, and direct a violent angle culminating in Adam Cole joining Bullet Club. We had a heavy hand in many PWG stories beforehand, but this was one of our first times doing so at Ring of Honor. And of course, they know it's beginning to work, right? And sort of chaotic mess, a lot of buzz about them, right? They're talking about Adam Page now, bringing him in. He's going to join the Bullet Club. And they're filming footage where they're going. You know, Nick has the idea of, instead of just having funny stuff in the videos, what if we had stuff about us being real and stuff? And at first, Matt's kind of like, nah, but then Nick understands, like, people need to connect with us and people need to see us, because he says this great thing. Historically, wrestlers are supposed to treat fans like fans. We were taught to lie to them and to work them into believing we were larger-than-life superstars on a different level than them. Perception is reality is the common motto most wrestlers live by. But he realizes, like, the more people connect to you, the more merchandise they buy on that sort of money level. But more than that, that they just have a different kind of affection and affinity for you, that the business was changing and they were going to be at the forefront of that. They didn't see it that way at the time necessarily, but that's clearly what has happened. Then there's this interesting part. Around the same time Being the Elite debuted, Cody Rhodes left WWE for greener pastures. We got a call from our old friend Kevin Steen, who had befriended Cody. Can you please look after him? He's a good dude. And then Cody Rhodes, like, dresses to the nines at a PWG show, and to the point where they didn't even recognize him at first, and he was kind of quiet and distant. But still, there's a connection there. And despite our less than exciting meeting, we vouched for Cody, and soon enough he was booked for a couple of shows for Ring of Honor. It was then that we started to see more of each other. Him always with that smiling face. We joined in small chit-chat and started to realize how quick-witted and hilarious he was. He would look at you intently, paying close attention to you, making you feel as if you were the only person alive. He was never not on as a performer, always holding court in every locker room he was in, telling old war stories from his career at WWE. That trait of being able to focus in on a conversation and making that person feel like you're the most important person in the world to them at that moment, you hear this again and again with incredibly successful people, men and women. I think it's an important thing to note. So now we're at the end of 2016. They signed a new 2-year deal with Ring of Honor. The deals were equal to what some guys on the main roster at WWE were getting, but we'd be working less than half the dates. They were, again, the most lucrative contracts in company history. We had proven to ourselves and to every wrestler that you could make a good living in wrestling without having to go to the WWE. And it established Ring of Honor as more than just another wrestling company. It made ROH a destination. And in Japan, where we were still free to work, we were having the time of our lives, being a part of some of the biggest matches and stories in the company. We were riding a high that seemed never ending. And then Geto, the booker, tells them that Cody Rhodes is going to join the Bullet Club. And they thought, well, I'm not sure if that fits. But then they realized that they could adapt and work Cody's gifts and strengths into the Bullet Club. So after Cody joined, he, Adam Cole, Adam Page, and we spent more time in the States representing Bullet Club at ROH while Kenny held it down in Japan with the others. It was like two different wings of the Bullet Club, both dominating both of its regions. So then that gives them more stuff for Being the Elite and how good Cody was in them, how they would put Brandy in them. And so they brokered a new deal with free agents Matt and Jeff Hardy, so they got to do stuff, doing stuff at the Hardy compound, right? And then finally Matt and Jeff tell them we're going to go back to the WWE, so they have this barn burner of a thing. The match was responsible for setting a new all-time record attendance for Ring of Honor, as 3,500 people would pack the Lakeland Center in Lakeland, Florida. I drive past it all the time. I've gone to many Ring of Honor shows there. So they realized we're a draw too. Just really, really great. After the match, Matt and Jeff stood in one piece, thankfully, because Vince McMahon had asked Matt and Jeff, make sure the Bucks take care of you because you're going to show up and do a ladder match at WrestleMania. WrestleMania that I went to. Yeah, I went to that WrestleMania in Orlando. My kids went bonkers when they saw the Hardys. Matt and Jeff stood in one piece thankfully, grabbed a microphone, and professed that we were the greatest tag team they've ever shared a ring with. Man, putting them over on the way out, man. Ellen, Gregory, and Allison watched from the crowd, along with my parents and Matt's entire family, all of whom made the cross-country flight for this important event. They knew how big this night was for us. I paused at the scene and remember watching the Hardys wrestle their legendary ladder matches from my parents' room, and now we had just done one of our own. It'd be like watching Jordan play for the Bulls than getting to play a one-on-one pickup game with him. Really awesome. So they talk about more Bullet Club stuff, a lot of the joint Ring of Honor New Japan stuff. It's stuff that's really great to read. But the long and short of it is that they were starting to get like 500,000 views on Being the Elite because they were filming some backstage stuff and sort of bridging the gap and like giving little foreshadowing hints of angles that were going to happen. Really, really smart. Then there's this part that I'm just going to let you read, but where Hot Topic starts getting Young Bucks shirts, Kenny Omega shirts, Bullet Club shirts, how they sell out, and then they start selling even more. Then this thing where they put out on Twitter, we're going to be at this Hot Topic if you want to join us and help us film a thing, and 300 people show up yelling and screaming, and they film all this stuff near the limo. Kind of recreating the Degeneration X invasion, and they do it themselves, invading a WWE show. Bullet Club invades Raw. 900,000 views. We're hotter than ever. Cody warns them, you know that there's a war now. They get an email from WWE's Senior Director of Intellectual Property. WWE claim they own the Too Sweet hand gesture, and we must discontinue use of the hand gesture in the ring and stop selling merchandise using it. It was a cease and desist letter, just like the one on our show, except this one was real. Badass. Chapter 16, my favorite one to date by Nick. Being the Elite. Next one, Going All In. So obviously that's going to bring us to the birth of what would become AEW. Super great. This book, I'm excited to read the next chapter. I'm excited to do these videos every day, but then I'm also sad because the book's coming to an end. But then the great thing about a book is I can always read this bitch again. But there's only one first time, isn't there? Anyway, thanks for joining me. I'll see you tomorrow.